I'm Erin and I've been working at PCL for the past 2 years, and today, like I said, we're going to talk about the high potential model. So I'll refer to it throughout as the HiPo model, and it's targeted at future leaders, and we're going to look at why it's needed, how it works, and under the bonnet of the report what that looks like and what the report looks like in practice. So the high potential model takes scales that you know from Hogan, so from the HBI, the HGS and the MVPI, and it merges them into competencies that are going to help you with future leaders. So before Hogan HiPo, how was this typically done? So it might be that we label our future leaders based on their past performance, or we perhaps pick people who are most visible in the organisation and label them a leader, people who stand out, and people who we see. But there's a lot of error and bias in these types of ways of picking high potential leaders. And there also might be, it might be the case that emerging leaders aren't necessarily effective leaders. And so there might be some humble but effective leaders that are getting overlooked because of these ways of picking our leaders. And then on top of that, there's currently a millennial retention battle where the millennial population are following a little bit more squiggly career paths. And that's leading to leaders being hired into roles rather than internal colleagues with that institutional knowledge being given the skills to grow into those leadership roles. So all that knowledge falling through the net. So effectively what Hogan is saying are that these methods are flawed, and they estimate the leadership failure figure to be 50%. So perhaps some of that failure can be attributed to looking for the wrong things there in new leaders. So that's where the HiPo model comes in. And the aim with the report is to temper that politics with science. They want to remove the biases that cause emergence to be the key, and try and level the playing field for underrepresented groups. And the aim with this report is to prioritise development and close any gaps that people might have, recognising that there is always room for development at this level. And the high potential model does this by measuring a number of leadership competencies that are going to show a person's potential to lead. And they also define that potential as the ability to build and lead teams that can outperform the competition. So before we look at the report, we can take a look at the high potential model itself. So this is based on decades of research on elements that are important for leadership success, so from a global population, across industries and sectors and countries. And all the factors that Hogan found were strongly linked to personality and therefore scales across the Hogan suite. So this is our high potential model. So what Hogan are suggesting is that first, before people can lead others, they need to demonstrate their own ability to contribute to a team and get that reputation for being a dependable and productive worker. So that's your leadership foundations. And next, they need to cultivate that leader-like impression. So they need to stand out, build connections with others, and really be seen as a leader and get noticed. So that's your emergence dimension. And then finally, once they've emerged as a potential leader, they need to be able to drive a team forwards to achieve those shared goals. So there's the effectiveness dimension. So we've got 3 dimensions then, and there's a lot of 3s throughout this model. So under each of these 3 dimensions is 3 competencies. So if we take foundations, we've got following process, thinking broadly, and getting along. Which will go, so what you can think of now is beneath each of those 3 is 3 Hogan scales. So you can start to think which scales might be linked to these 3 competencies. And then beneath emergence, we've got standing out, influencing others, and building connections. And again, they're all built by Hogan scales, 3 Hogan scales per competency. And then for effectiveness, you've got leading the business, managing resources, and leading people. So effectively across the report, you're going to see all the scales that you know and you've learnt about with Hogan. So you're going to see 7 of the HPI scales, 9 of the HDS scales, and 7 of the MVPI scales. So there's a few that you don't see, but we'll talk about that throughout. So taking it back to the Leadership Foundations competency, if we just take a deep dive into that competency, these are those attributes that are about getting noticed as a promising employee. So someone who will easily transition into that role. They've got a good reputation for being quite committed to the organisation. And it's not that if it's a low score they can't lead, but they might be slightly more difficult to get along with, potentially micromanaging. So just one to watch. So for following process, this is all about following organisational rules and respecting conventions. So being hardworking and reliable. So if I just show you the competencies, the Hogan scales that are involved, you'll see you've got 1 HPI scale, prudence, a HDS scale, dutiful, and MVPI, tradition. And they all contribute to the score that you're going to get for following process competency. And in fact, they're all scored positively for that competency. So if we look at the next one, I'll ask you to guess. So thinking broadly. So thinking broadly is all about solving problems strategically, thinking outside the box, being seen as quite inventive, curious, well-informed. So as a clue, you've got 2 HPI scales here and a HDS scale. So can anybody guess which might be involved in that competency? Imaginative, I heard, inquisitive, and also learning approach. So that's going to contribute to that thinking broadly competency. Someone who's quite curious, creative, and keeping up to date. So the final one in this dimension is getting along. And this looks at someone who's quite pleasant, easy to get along with, rewarding to deal with, and they're probably seen as quite friendly, diplomatic, and charming. So any guesses? We've got 2 HPI and an MVPI. Lots of guesses. So if anyone said interpersonal sensitivity, so seeming socially perceptive, tactful, adjustment for that calm, optimistic, steady, and then altruistic, so yeah, wanting to help others and help where they can. So hopefully you can see how the scales that you know feed into this report. And so here we are still on Leadership Foundation. So this is the groundwork to build your leadership capabilities, but this isn't enough alone to perform as a leader. So many employees are rewarded to deal with good organisational citizens, but they lack the interest in becoming a leader or maybe the ability. So the next step, Hogan are saying, is you need to first look like a leader at work. And so that's the essence of leadership emergence. So others are likely to view people who've got a high score on leadership emergence as leader-like and having a voice, a natural leader who stands out from the crowd. So to move on to standing out, this is all about making others aware of your contributions, being comfortable taking credit, being charming and quite confident. So any ideas? We've got 2 HDS and an MVPI. Colourful, and it was not mischievous for this one, but we'll get to that later. So we're actually looking for, and these are scored positively, all 3 of these. So we want a bit of that bold side and that colourful, being able to get yourself out there, and also maybe that desire for recognition would be helpful towards that competency. So hopefully that makes sense. And then the next one, influencing others, is all about persuading co-workers, getting people on board to your desired outcomes, and just exercising your influence at work. So to show you the scales for this one. So we've got ambition from the HPI, and then excitable and cautious. These are negatively scored for this competency. So you might not want someone who's got that fear of failure. They're not maybe going to influence others as much. Same with someone who's got that initial passion and then kind of flying off the handle when setbacks occur. So this is just two things that are flagged up within this competency. And then the final one on this leadership emergence dimension is building connections. So that's all about creating strategic networks and business relationships. And higher scorers they seem quite outgoing. They've got a lot of business contacts, able to develop networks. And this one's got 1 HBI, 1 HGS, and an MVPI. So is anyone thinking of any? Sociability, definitely, for our HBI. Affiliation, and a low HGS, which is, we would want it negatively scored for reserved. So someone who really puts themselves out there. But again, this isn't enough alone for a person to become an effective leader and to achieve those shared goals. So that's where the final dimension comes in, of leadership effectiveness. So this is all considered the essence of leadership, the ability to move the business forward into the future. And unlike the other two dimensions, a really low score here would be something that we'd want urgent development for a high potential. The others you would develop, but this is the most important, is what I'm trying to say. So leading the business is our first competency. It's all about that focus on organisational outcomes. They have a reputation for wanting to take charge, and they're probably going to push others to pursue their goals and achieve their goals. So does that sound like any MVPI scales we know? It's got 2 MVPI and a HBI. Yeah, power, commerce, and ambition. So someone who seems quite leader-like. They want to have that status and make money for the business. And then managing resources, that's all about having that reputation for being decisive, comfortable taking smart risks, and effective in planning and flexing plans. So the scales under here are prudence, and then we've also got mischievous, which would be negatively scored, and science. So it's all about not taking too much risk, with that mischievous being a bit lower, and taking comfortable, smart risks that are going to be good for the business. And then leading people is our final competency. So this is all about moving towards shared goals and pushing for results, but also being patient. So under this one, maybe with the patience word, you think interpersonal sensitivity, the degree to which someone's socially perceptive, tactful, and then these 2 scores would be negatively scored, so excitable and sceptical. So that's the competencies, a real quick run through, but just so you know what we're getting at when we're talking about these competencies and which scales really contribute to them. And throughout, we've spoken on Hogan's emphasis on the fact that effective leaders aren't necessarily emergent, and emergent leaders aren't necessarily effective. So along the side here we have emergence, and the bottom we have effectiveness, and in the middle you have your leadership foundations, which should be the baseline for any leader. So just to give some labels to these, if we have low emergence and low effectiveness, this is our limited potential leaders, needs work in both of these areas to be able to become a good leader. High emergence and low effectiveness, these are your politicians, so they talk themselves to the top, but maybe when they get there, they struggle. And then high effectiveness, low emergence, that's your hidden gems. So these people who are quite humble, but maybe too modest to actually get themselves noticed. And then up top then, you've got high emergence and high effectiveness, which is your true hypo. So another way you can think of this is with the ladder analogy. So for climbing the ranks in an organisation, the skills you need to climb a ladder, so your strength, aren't necessarily the same as the skills you need to stay at the top, so your balance. So here, the skills required to emerge aren't the same skills required to perform as an effective leader. So just to show you how this would look in a report, this is your executive summary. So here you can see the 3 dimensions of leadership and their competencies beneath. And these competencies are scored against a global population of professionals, of managers and executives. So you're given a colour to show whether you scored highly, above average, below average or low in comparison with that population. And then there's also a ranking of your highest to lowest scores from 1 to 9. So then at the bottom, you'll see the recommended focus areas cover the high scores and the low scores, because as with anything with Hogan, we want to help people not to overplay their strengths and leverage their strengths and then build on their blind spots. So we can see this person's top score was leading the business in leadership effectiveness and their lowest score standing out in leadership emergence. So that's just your executive summary, and then you're going to get the Hogan scales and how they contributed to those scores. So you get the percentiles for the corresponding scores. So you can see here this was prudence and dutiful, going into that following process, and reserved and sociability, and how that contributes to building connections. And beneath each of those, you'll have some development tips which are based on the score level. So the tips are always in like a start, stop, continue structure. And there's one of those for every score. So if a score's come up against different competencies, it'll be worded towards the competency that we're focusing on. But yeah, Gillian and Sophia will talk you through how they've been able to use this data at Condé Nast. But for now, this is what the report looks like. So overall then, the high potential model was created to stress that effectiveness is the ultimate goal of developing high potentials, and to be able to give some actionable development points and customizable development points across these 3 areas of high potential. The report can help high potential employees to prioritize their goals and also really help in career pathing conversations. As well as assisting organisations in promotion decisions and make sure that those high potentials don't fall through the net. Thank you for listening, and Gillian and Sophia are going to take the next talk.